And that's really what gets me through a lot of the pains in my life is I realize, oh, and I bet you everybody listening today,
Mhm.
something that is horrible at the time, you
Yeah,
look back on it 10 years later, like, oh, I'm
yeah,
so happy that
yeah.
happened.
That's right.
So many better things happen because of that. And so but these are the types of stories, whether you're a teenager or an adult, you need to give yourself positive. This is why I listen to your podcast. It's like something positive. Like, oh, wow, there's actually positive people out there. They're interested in hearing about success and hearing about, well, what are the simple strategies that we can do to help frame ourselves in a more positive world. So again, I really do want to give you kudos for
Thank you.
having that kind of form, Audley. You're making a positive difference.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where our ongoing goal is to help our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. It's really, really appreciated. Now, we're going to talk about the joy of reading on this episode of the podcast. And developing a joy of reading is very much like planting a seed in a garden. As a tiny seed, when it's nurtured with care, water, and sunlight, it grows into a flourishing and vibrant plant. The habit of reading, when cultivated in a person's life, has the power to unlock their potential and broaden their horizons. And I know that when I was a kid, I was a big, big fan of reading. Danny Brassell is a renowned speaker, educator, and author who's on a mission to bring back that joy of education into the workplace. With over 100 speaking engagements annually worldwide, Danny's engaging programs inspire parents, students, and corporate professionals to embrace the power of reading, positive habits, and personal growth. In this episode, Danny shares valuable insights and strategies on how to cultivate a love for reading, find joy in learning, and navigate life's challenges with a positive mindset. His expertise in education and motivation makes him the perfect fit for our discussion on discovering our inner purpose. So now that we got the table set, here's our conversation with Danny Brassell. Enjoy. Hey, Danny, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to listen like this. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Audley. And more importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, and yes, I agree with you. We certainly could use more joy in the world, and I think when I sort of think back to when I started this podcast and really what my focus was, it was really around the principles I talk about always and often is encourage individuals to live that best audacious life that we talk about here. And what that is not going to be the exact same for individuals. I think I think we all can agree that we're all on our own separate path. And we're meant to be on our own separate path, and so it's up to us to sort of chart our own course, regardless of what Sally, Tom, Dick, and Jerry are doing. Right? It's you for you, and that's kind of it is. And I think, and I truly believe that by doing so, by me being who I'm supposed to be, I'm encouraging others to do the same and be themselves. And I think that's what makes this world more vibrant, exciting, and a great place to live.
Completely agree.
So you specialize and really tailor a lot of your work around the importance of reading and sort of why that is important for individuals to do, and you tie that into success in life, right? So maybe as a starting point, Dan, I can get you to sort of describe or elaborate further on the work that you do and really how you assist individuals to kind of get to that better place that we refer to here.
Sure thing. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. So my mission is to bring joy back into education in the workplace. I do that in 4 different ways. First of all, I speak over 100 dates a year all around the world, primarily to schools and parent groups, but also to corporations, reminding people of why they do what they do. Take your job seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously, because you ain't all that. Neither am I. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for a week. Those little ones will set you straight. Second of all, I've got the world's top reading engagement program, which in just over 2 months shows parents how to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading, because I find that schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it learning how to read if you never want to read? I teach kids why to read, because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they enjoy it. And there's simple strategies I share with people on how to make reading an enjoyable activity. Third, I work with entrepreneurs, executives, and business owners all around the world on crafting powerful presentations that get their audiences to take the next step, whether that's to purchase their product or to donate to their cause or even to invest in their idea. And then finally, I'm the North American CEO for a company called Cyber Smarties, which was founded in 2015 by an Irishman named Diarmuid Hudner, which it's a social media platform for kids ages 5 to 12 that teaches kids how to use social media in a positive way. Like all forms of technology, social media just kind of appeared and nobody taught anybody how to use it. And so the lowest common denominator took over, and there's positive ways to use it. And so I always try to teach positive habits. It's what I love about your podcast. This is all about getting people in a better mindset and those simple habits in accomplishing that.
So I love you got three specific sort of divergence avenues, if you will. Each are very, very important, and what we'll sort of touch on those individually. But I just kind of like the three different lanes that you're in, and wearing different hats often, it sounds like, right? It changing, right? I think, though, from what I gathered, just as you've talked and spoke, that there's a common theme of joy that runs throughout all the different things that you're doing. Uh,
Yeah,
and,
that's cool. Yeah, you and I were talking earlier. It's why I love speaking to Canadian audiences, is because they laugh. You know, Americans tend to be offended by anything nowadays, and
right.
I always appreciate Canadians because they don't take themselves too seriously. And life is too short, man. We need to laugh a lot more.
So, Danny, the thing that I'm curious about before we dive into your work is how did you land here yourself?
Oh, I made all kinds of mistakes. You know, that's what I always tell people is if you really want to become a successful speaker, screw up a lot in your life. In 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could focus on all the negatives that came out of that, but I'm a positive person. I looked at all the benefits. So first of all, my wife is my life mate. I mean, I put her through the ringer and she stuck by me the entire way. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned that money's just a tool. Easy come, easy go. It can be taken just like that overnight. Third, I became a Christian, which I'm not proud to say that it took me to screw up to become a Christian. But the more I read the Bible, the more I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. Fourth, I try not to judge other people, because if I was somebody looking at what I had done, I would have said, "Oh, you deserve that." But now I really understand that unless you know everything about a person, you don't really know anything about a person. And then fifth, and this is was really important, was I didn't want to declare bankruptcy. Eventually, I had to because of a place called North Cuba, also known as Florida. But I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. And so my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money then if you don't want to file
Right.
bankruptcy. So I was a university professor at the time. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit his number right on the number. Well, then the next year, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. And
Right.
so in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And so basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in history, I was able to build up a speaking business, which has taken me all over the world. I never thought I'd actually coach people in speaking because I'm kind of a perfectionist and I want people, I
Right.
have a two-step program to my coaching. Listen to what I say, and then step B is do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have lots of coaches. I'm a big believer in coaches. And when a coach tells me to do something, I do it because there's a reason that they're telling me to do it. And I've actually been blessed. I've worked with so many people that I was just working with three people yesterday, and the presentations they were able to craft were just incredible. We just started 2 days ago, and I said, "Look at this! You've created this incredibly engaging and positive presentation." That's a little bit different than a lot of these speaking coaches I see. Most people say, "Oh, talk about when your daddy touched you when you were 3 years old." I'm like, gosh, like here's why I have a problem with that, Audley. I mean, the world just survived a global pandemic. I think we need a lot more hope. Everybody's been through a lot of bad stuff. Second of all, I've got a friend, and his talk is about the day his daughter was murdered. I don't know about you, but you got to be a lot stronger than me to talk about the worst moment of your life over 1,000 times. And then third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one goal, oddly, when I'm giving a presentation, I want people to leave smiling and feeling better
Sure,
about themselves,
sure.
happier. There's something noble about telling jokes again and again. But I believe when you keep on telling that sob story again and again, I think after the 25th time, those are crocodile tears. Now you're being manipulative. And I actually resent speakers that play those heartstrings. Now, I'm not saying all of them, but I can tell you a lot of them. And it's definitely an effective sales technique. But to me, there's something very manipulative. I want to take a shower after I listen to those people. So,
Yeah, no, I hear you.
yeah,
I know,
so I've used my mistakes have made me a better person.
yeah, yeah, no, and that's usually the way it goes. I mean, you have to, in essence, hit rock bottom a lot of times to get the very low before you recognize, those the changes need to be made, changes for the better, need to be made. It was just funny. You referenced the Bible as an example. I was literally just in a conversation with someone yesterday, and we're talking about the one thing that doesn't change over the course of humankind is our reactions as humans, right?
Yeah.
So you take the Bible, which it was written, say, 2,000 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Give or take a year or two, right?
Yeah.
2,000 years ago, and yet you still find examples of people who failed, who lied, who cheated, who made, I mean, those are negative things, but they experienced other positive emotions and joyous elements of joy as well too. So the point is, those things don't change, and
That's
that's
right.
the one constant that will always exist. And I think if we can harness, so it's really about choosing what you want to harness. So in your case, that we're focusing on the joy,
Yeah, yeah.
focusing on the positive, the optimistic side of life. That, to me, and to your point, really sends a better message, because I do agree with you that you hear these speakers, and they tell these very powerful stories,
Mhm.
uh, life altering stories, and oftentimes you get to the other side where they show, here's how I got out of it, and this is what you can do, and I get all that. uh, but taking that audience an emotional roller coaster is a lot.
Yeah.
It really is a lot. And not to say that you can't do that, um, and you shouldn't do that, because I'm not saying that at all. I believe there's no shoulds over here. But I do believe that, just because the way I naturally move through the world, positive, optimistic, I'm not bringing no one down. We're
Yeah.
staying up. And that's just the way it is, right? So that's why I certainly wanted to just touch on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and the two speakers before me were talking about you should enjoy the journey. And I was just in a mood that day. So when I got up on stage, I'm like, you ever notice the people that say enjoy the journey have already succeeded? When they couldn't make rent, where they're like, wow, I'm really enjoying this journey. This is great. I'm having a tough time feeding my kids. And, this is a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this. Nobody enjoys the journey. It's
Right.
really bad advice, I thought. And then the other thing I was pointing out to I was the people I was coaching yesterday, I said, you ever notice that most motivational speakers never grew up middle class? They all, oh, I washed dishes in my bathtub. I'm like, really? Why? You didn't have a sink? Or, oh, I lived in my garage. Really? So
Right.
what was the garage attached to? Oh, I was homeless, living under a bridge, and a car hit a pothole, and a book fell out and it hit me on the head. And I started reading it, and it was about how to invest in real estate with no money down, and kind of made sense. So I started buying some houses. And then all my homeless friends said, hey, can you teach us how to invest in real estate with no money down? And so that's why I'm introducing you to my real estate coaching program. It's
Uh,
always the same story.
I remember once, and I do some speaking as well. I remember early on, she is easy 10, 15 years ago, I want to say, maybe even more. I decided it was a good idea to enter this speaking competition,
Hmm.
right? And I thought a couple of things. One, to win something was great. You want to be a speaker, why not win a competition? Great. And then I thought the idea of practice. And I tell you, Danny, the I thought I gave a great speech. It was
Hmm.
upbeat. It was light. It was funny. It was all these things resonated with people. I told a couple of stories of my kids when they were younger and things that they did, and we had a great time. And it ended, and people clapped, and I felt good. Walked off the stage and felt good. The woman after me went up and gave a speech about overcoming a terrible car accident
Yeah.
and losing, losing almost a year of her life in recovery and all the things that she went through. Um, and again, it was a powerful speech. It brought the audience down without question.
Yeah.
And they went up, but and when she took them on this journey, she nicely took them on this journey and brought them back up. And at the end, and she won. She won a competition. Like, I congratulated her. I said, fantastic. And I remember at the end of the night, I was in the coat check lineup, getting my coat, and there was two women in front of me talking about what took place. And she said, and the one woman said something to the effect that is why you need to have a powerful story. And that night, Danny, I left going, oh, I guess I don't have a story to tell, right? I don't have a solid story to grip people. And I actually believed it for a really, really long time. But we all have a story to tell. There's something to be taken from all of our experiences. They all are valuable and they all can teach others something. And that's been a message that so first off, that was a lesson that I had to learn because I walked away thinking, oh, I got nothing. I'm trying to find a new gig, right? Because this isn't coming out for me. I lived an okay life. I didn't, I had an okay childhood. I don't have no scars that followed me in adulthood. I'm happy. My family's connected. All these great things. I love my kids. My kids love me. I guess I'm okay. I mean, so
Not
the thing
good
that I'm
effort
not
enough.
cut out
Yeah.
for it because all these things are going in my way. So yeah. But my point is, everyone's got a story to tell, and everyone's got something to share.
Absolutely. Well, and I just choose to lift people up. I mean, I know I can tell the stories to bring people down, but
Sure.
I don't believe in that. And I'm not saying that, some of these people really are sincere. I'm saying that these people that go out there and they're selling something with their story and they're doing it hundreds of times. I just think it's manipulative, but there's plenty of people that have given talks that are I mean, I was at a TED talk and the girl before me was this 17-year-old girl, and she gave an entire talk about the reason to be a vegetarian had nothing to do with your health. It had to do with the environment. And it was such a powerful talk. I was like, wow. I felt like, wow, the world's in good hands. We've got a whole generation of people that are going to be problem solvers. So, don't get me wrong on that, but I don't let anybody ever put down that you were able to get people to smile into it. There was that movie back in the 40s, Sullivan's Travels. It's about a writer that's very successful doing comedy, and he decides he wants to win an Academy Award, so he starts writing drama.
Right.
And through I can't remember the events, but he gets put in prison, and it's miserable experience. But one day the prisoners get to go watch like a Mickey Mouse movie, and
Yep.
for a couple of hours they're just so happy. And he gets, it turns out the charges were false against him. He's able to get free, and so now he's back in Hollywood, and they're like, oh, are you going to write that Oscar winning picture? He's like, no, I'm going to write comedy because I realize that comedy makes people smile, and I don't need it's the same. You ever watch the Academy Awards? A comedy, I think in the history of the Academy Awards, only one comedy has ever won, which was Annie Hall.
Right.
They actually have a category for best animated feature, but they don't do anything to recognize comedies. And
Yeah.
comedies are what keep me alive. And those are
Yeah.
the movies. I mean, I don't want to watch depressing movies again and again, but comedies, I can watch them again and again and again. They
Yeah.
make me laugh all the time.
That's a fantastic point around sort of the significance and importance of comedy and the joy that it brings us. As you mentioned joy earlier, you made that connection to joy and reading and how you and encourage young people to find that joy in reading. Can you talk about how you do that, Danny?
Well, gosh, I have a book club online, lazyreaders.com. Anybody can subscribe for free. It's every month I give you 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something you can read when you're stuck in a boring meeting. It's meant to be fun. But oddly, when I go to the bookstore, which there still are a few bookstores left,
Yeah.
it bothers me because I'll go to the young adult section and all of the books are about suicide and date rape and drug addiction. I'm like, no wonder teenagers are so screwed up. They have nothing positive to
Yeah.
read. And
Right.
so when I was a middle school teacher, I've taught all ages from preschoolers to rocket scientists. But when I taught middle schoolers, I was the only teacher at my school to have no students ever tardy. And it's because I started off every class with a Paul Harvey story. I'm a lot older than you, Audley. Paul Harvey, I grew up listening to him on the radio. He'd come up at 12:15 every day. He'd be like, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And he tells you a story about a person or a company or something, and you're trying to guess what it is the whole time. And
Right.
my students loved it. They were always trying to figure out who's he talking about.
Yep.
The problem with those Paul Harvey stories, though, is some of them are about like Sears and Roebuck. Well, kids today have no idea who
Right.
Sears and Roebuck were. So
Exactly.
the last book that I wrote was called Leadership Begins with Motivation. And this is basically an homage to Paul Harvey with some little, may I share just one little short story here
Yeah,
for you?
sure, sure,
Quick.
please.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So here's the type of stories that I get kids interested in. On the morning of January 17th, 1977, Gary Gilmore, in a plain t shirt, strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Wyden, an advertising executive who co founded the Wyden and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmate's final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. Trust me on this one, Wyden implored the company's co founder. And the co founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co founded was a shoe company called Nike. And advertising executive Dan Wyden slightly altered death row inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, let's do it, into the phrase, just do it. And so those are the types of stories that I'm always trying to get kids thinking about positive role models. Now, this was the interesting thing. After I wrote this book, I read it and I was kind of baffled, completely unintentionally. So many of my examples of stories were of white male Americans. And so the book I'm writing right now, almost all the stories are about females, minorities, and international examples,
Okay.
because I think kids need to hear these types
Yeah,
of stories. But
sure.
we become what we read. I always tell kids, you are what you read, so read good stuff. I mean, this is why I stopped watching the news. If you really want, there's a reason that if you're watching the television news, all the commercials are on depression medications because it's the most depressing thing in the world. Read something positive, and that's why I'm in a men's Bible study, and I always, when you're talking about the Bible, it kind of cracked me up because we're reading Exodus right now,
Yep.
and the Israelites, all they ever do is gripe. And I'm like, man, these people gripe about it. And then I'm like, oh,
Yes.
this is us.
Yes. 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 Yes.
We're all part of the problem. We don't solve the problems.
And that was 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2,000 years ago. I mean, heck, if they made the Bible into a TV show, they couldn't show it because it's so graphic. There are so many messed up things. I mean, there's more messed up things in the Bible than anything else I've ever. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And there's also great things. And then I'm a person because again, I just see the humor in the Bible all the time. I mean, I just read Genesis, and one of my favorite stories in Genesis is um, Jacob when he passes away. Joseph's brothers are all kind of slimy. They're like, oh no, Joseph's going to take his vengeance out on us for us trying to kill him. And so they go up to him like, hey, Joe, um, before Dad died, he said you're not supposed to avenge all the bad stuff that we did.
Right.
And then it's a really nice moment. Joseph looks at him. He's like, oh no, everything you meant for evil, God meant for good. And that's really what gets me through a lot of the pains in my life is I realize, oh, and I bet you everybody listening today,
Mhm.
something that is horrible at the time, you
Yeah.
look back on it 10 years later, like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
so happy that happened.
That's right.
So many better things happen because of that. And so that's But these are the types of stories, whether you're a teenager or an adult, you need to give yourself positive. That's why I listen to your podcast. It's like something positive. Like, oh, wow, there's actually positive people out there. They're interested in hearing about success and hearing about, well, what are the simple strategies that we can do to help frame ourselves in a more positive world. So I really do want to give you kudos for
Thank you.
having that kind of form, Audley. You're making a positive difference.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And again, it's as I said, it's something that I felt compelled to do and wanted to do, and it's a part of me. And the authenticity, I think, is what really shines through, and what I want to keep delivering on. So I thank you for
Yep.
that. I think the illustration that you gave, just with respects to the several illustrations that you gave with respects to the positivity and joy are all so key. And so when you can inspire young people in a way that wants them to read and grips them to read, I think you're definitely that is the path, as opposed to take this book and go. It's almost, what's that, the expression, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, you bring the horse to the water, you make them want to drink, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the distinction. I think when you can do that, I mean, you're moving mountains, as far as I'm concerned, for sure.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's simple strategies. I mean, like one of the things. Here's one for everybody listening. So, parents always, when I do a parent training, like, how do I get my kid reading? I'm like, well, turn on the closed captioning on your television set, and they look at me and they're like, wait a sec. If the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? And I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's actually very difficult to do. Your brain's actually directed to the text.
Yes.
And research that supports this, if you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet, except for one. The country where the kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people always ask, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they do is they buy all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Gilligan's Island, and they put subtitles in Finnish. The kids are reading constantly. And so that's one of the easiest strategies anybody can do. Because again, this is what this podcast is about, is what are the simple habits? So there's two numbers that in my reading program that I want people to remember. The first one is 67. So a lot of people say it takes 21 days to change a habit. To those people, I say, show me the research on that. It's completely bogus. I know exactly where the number comes from. It comes from a wonderful book that everybody should read, written in 1960, called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. Now, in the preface of the book, Dr. Maltz was a plastic surgeon, and he just flippantly commented that he noticed it took most of his patients about 3 weeks to get used to their new faces. Well, a lot of self-help gurus, a lot of people I actually respect, by the way, they started telling people it takes 21 days to change a habit. There is no research to support this whatsoever.
Right.
So in 2009, the University of London did a habit formation study, and they found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. Well, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67 days. And it depends on the type of habit you're trying to form. So for example, if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast, maybe you can make that into a habit within 21 days or 18 days or whatever. But if you're trying to quit smoking, that's going to take 254 days. And this is why this is important for people to understand. Let's say you follow a diet religiously for 21 days, but on day 22, you fall off the wagon. Well, you blame yourself. Well, that's wrong, because research shows it takes at least 3 times longer on average to form a habit. So that's the first number, 67. The next number is 20. So researchers were trying to figure out what makes students successful. So they were looking at successful students all around the planet, and they were looking for characteristics. They discovered one that just blew them away. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. So they looked at the low students, the average students, and the high students. So the lowest students, the 20th percentile, F students, these people are failing, they're your worst students. They average less than a minute a day reading outside of school. Well, that didn't surprise anybody. It's probably why they're at the bottom of the class. But the next number did surprise the researchers. The kids in the middle of the class, the 70th percentile, C students, average students, they average 9.6 minutes a day reading outside of school. Okay. And so when I'm doing a live training, this is when the room gets real quiet and the first hand raises and a parent says, wait a sec, are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day at home, I can take him from an F to a C? That's exactly what I'm saying. There's actually a lot of research to support this, but the next number shocked the researchers. The kids near the top of the class, 90th percentile, A-minus students, some of your best and the brightest, do they spend 3 hours a day outside of school reading for fun? No. Do they spend an hour a day outside of school reading for fun? No. The average was just over 20 minutes a day. My entire program is training parents how to find those 20 minutes in the day. Now, there's two things that you have to know. First of all, being read aloud to is just as powerful as reading on your own. I work with a lot of CEOs. People don't know this. Over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. Well, dyslexia is a reading disability. All reading disabilities are curable. Dyslexics tend to process information better through their ears. And so one of the first strategies I share with them is, hey, turn on those Audible books. And so like, for example, if their school is 10 minutes away, you drive them back and forth every day, you can cover the 20 minutes just taking them to and from school, put in an Audible book. The second thing that's important is the minutes don't have to be consecutive. So you can do a minute here, 3 minutes there, 5 minutes there. And it's just like this podcast, simple strategies. Anybody can do this. You just have to figure out ways to make it fun. I mean, it's all human beings are pleasure-oriented creatures. You always find time for things that you like to do. And so what we have to do is figure out how do we get kids to like what they, I mean, when I was a teacher with my little ones, for reading time, we played music, they could read with their friends. I let them eat and drink while they read. We had music on. When we did PE, I'd make them do laps, I'd make them do push-ups and stuff. And so whenever we had free time, I'm like, what do you want, PE or reading? They're like, reading. We'll deal with childhood obesity another time. That's something else.
One issue at a time.
I want the kids to be readers.
Just one issue at a time. One issue at a time. But I do. It does resonate with the whole idea of reading. Making reading fun and enjoyable. When I was a kid, I actually played a game, and I loved reading growing up. I just absolutely loved reading. I was that kid that when they did the readathons, I was like,
wow,
miles ahead. I just loved reading. And one of the games, and it really was a game, nothing more than that. There was no one pushing me, no one did. But I used to be fast. So if I was out and I saw a sign, I used to try and count all the letters in, like, so for example, how many E's are in that sign, and I'm reading it to get right. And it just became a game. And then say if a commercial came on TV, it's like, can I read them all before the commercial ends? And then it just became just a habit I just always did. And again, it's one of those things where you have some perspective now. You look back, you're like, oh, that probably contributed to why I enjoy reading and why. And again, you don't see it in the moment. You're not thinking. I wasn't trying to come up with strategies to be a better reader as a kid. I was just playing a game. But it was through that whole process. I liken it to the whole Karate Kid example, wax on, wax off. Here he's thinking he's painting a fence and washing the car, but he's actually learning moves. And so it's the same kind of idea. If you make it enjoyable, although Daniel's son didn't learn it, he didn't appreciate it, have fun washing cars and painting fences. But during that action of doing something, another lesson comes out of it. And that's sort of what I take as you were talking.
Show me, turn the page. That's great.
That's right. That's awesome, though. But no, I think that's a great strategy. And so I would imagine like parents are kind of blown away when you're able to break it down, the simplicity of this, are they not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I've actually worked with lots of illiterate parents, and they were able to. It's actually fascinating because the kid, it's an amazing moment when they've been reading with mom and dad for a couple of years, and they realize, wait a second, they're not reading it. They're just looking at the pictures. And I love those moments. And for those parents, I used to work with a lot of public libraries have wonderful adult literacy programs. You were blessed. You were completely blessed, Audley, because the only thing I read growing up was TV Guide. I was not a reader. My father was a librarian. I always hated the library. It always smelled funny. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. And there was always some homeless guy by the bookshelves, thought he was a vampire. It freaked me out. I hated it. And it wasn't until I've spent most of my teaching career in South Central Los Angeles in the hood. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the hood and I saw a lot of my students didn't have the advantages I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I mean, I was blessed, Audley. I mean, I had both of my parents in the home. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table.
Yes.
And my parents always read in front of us kids. They read to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so that's really when I became an ambassador. I wanted to show kids all the cool. I think a lot of kids don't know all the cool stuff out there to read. And I'm not a person. I don't promote like negative books. It's and I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to, it just means I'm not going to promote it. I had the same policy as a teacher. If a parent didn't want me to read a book to their kids, I got another book. There's over 4 million books written in English last year alone. I can find a book your kid's going to like. I mean, you know, I got some friends, they think Harry Potter is the most vicious and negative thing ever written. And I'm like, well, I mean, if your faith is so weak that a children's book can, twist your faith, maybe you should re-examine your faith. But I love J.K. Rowling because I'm like, man, she got kids reading again. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing kids that are excited about something to read. And they're fairly positive books. There's pretty decent storylines in there. But I mean, again, if a parent had a problem with me with Harry Potter, I get rid of it. I'll find something else. There's other books out there. Zillions. I mean, my favorite are series books. When a kid tells me they like the Berenstain Bears, I'm like, great. Here's 400 other ones to choose from. We got plenty to read. The Magic Tree House. I mean, these series books are just like the greatest thing ever. So, different strokes for different folks. I mean, an important thing for everybody listening, this doesn't matter what age you are. Our research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. I tell this to parents all the time. The little boy who only likes reading Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who doesn't read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but we got to get the kid hooked first, and so you figure out what is it. So many little boys I've worked with, it's been Sports Illustrated, sports books or dinosaur books or monster truck books. And like the little girls, it's fascinating when I'm talking to women. I'm like, well, what was your favorite book growing up? They're all going to say like Nancy Drew. I'm like, of course they're going to say Nancy Drew because it's a strong female protagonist. That's where I think the Harry Potter books were brilliant. Is Harry is a huge character, but so is Hermione, and so you're hitting both of them that way. But it goes back to what we were talking about with the books I'm writing. I'm like, oh, kids need those role models. I think it's important that kids are exposed to certain things. And I'm having a ball writing the book that I'm writing right now because I'm learning a lot of stuff, and I'm like, wow, it's kind of interesting. I don't think people intentionally leave this out of curricula, but I think it is left out of curricula. And there's a lot of amazing stories out there that people need to know about.
Yes. I love the fact that what you alluded to is sort of meeting people where they're at. So if they like this certain types of books or certain types of material, and then start there, right? And so it's really, as opposed to the blanket, hey, everyone take this book class, everyone read this, and you are. Will you have some that are interested, engaged, and want to? Sure, you will.
I'm a Baptist in your front row, Audley. I'm saying amen. Like, I remember in high school, I had a teacher, she made us read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And no offense to people that love The Scarlet Letter. The book is about Hester Prynne commits adultery. And so she has to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand one day in class and I said, can I wear a B on my chest? Because I was so bored reading that book. And there's no reason that I hate that they force kids to read certain books. I really do. I mean, there's nothing, when I was so I taught in the Hood and I'm supposed to teach Macbeth to 16 African-American boys that nobody else wanted to teach. And the way I was able to get them to read Macbeth was we read Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned by Walter Mosley, who's from South Central LA. And he talks like the kids do. And the kids, all I had to say is, you see these gangs? All this is happening. Shakespeare, these are all gangs, and they're speaking their own slang too. You hear, and the guys are, oh yeah, and then they got into it. You had to connect it. That's all you had to do. I mean, I'm not a great teacher. I'm just like, okay, what are you interested in? Let's start there. I loved how you said that. Meet people where they are. Why don't we do that? It's tougher. I tell this to teachers all the time. Anybody can be a teacher. It takes a lot of hard work to be a good teacher, though. You got 33 students. They're all different.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
do one thing for every kid.
Yeah. And I find now as I mean, I think things have changed for teachers oh so much because when you see a child in front of you, you have children that are dealing with some real life stuff that
Mm.
can impact their ability to learn. And as a teacher, you're now having to manage and navigate those. So the teaching world is very, very different. And I totally respect it and appreciate that. And again, the whole idea of coming to where that person's at, meeting them there, and saying, okay, what's your starting point? Because I know it's not
Mm.
going to be the same for all the other 33 students and how we get them and collectively. And I get it, to be able to sit down with each and every single individual student is a challenge. There's time constraints. And, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just not an easy task. But I think if you can collectively understand where everyone is at, because there is some commonality amongst them. There is, even if there's just one little red thread between them all. What is that thread, and how can you maximize that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And that that's what still exhilarates me about working with anybody, any age level, is figuring out where they're at. And even now when I'm working with executives on their speeches, it's fascinating watching. I'm like, oh, okay. I get really excited about crafting the presentation. I'm like, oh, well, here's a way to do it. And they're like, well, that's not really my style. I'm like, okay, well, what do you like to do? Okay, how about we take this angle? And
Right.
they're like, oh yeah, that's kind of and I'm like, oh, I love this process. It's like when I was watching what was it, on Disney Plus, they had I think it was called Let It Be or whatever, but it's about the Beatles, and they're like, it's like 8 hours of documentary footage, and like John and George are having like some conversation, and you're watching Paul McCartney in the background, and he's like oh, some for Winslow, Arizona. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's writing Get Back right now. But like, you're listening to him, he's like, from Austin, Texas. He's like coming
Yeah.
up with different states and stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is fantastic. I'm watching the process, and
Yes.
it's
Yes.
interesting with kids too. That's where I like the little kid. Little kids are a lot more fun. I mean, I started off as a secondary teacher, but my
Yep.
passion is the little ones because they
Sure.
they don't know what they don't know yet, and they're amazing. Um, and like when they learn something, you see it across their eyes. And I'm like, oh, Jesse just learned how to add. Whereas my middle schoolers, even when they learn something, like, I still hate you. And it's like, okay, it's all hormones in middle school and high school. But the little ones are, and that's where I learned humility. This is why I always tell people, I'm
Yeah.
like, you know all that, teach kindergarten. I mean, I had a little girl, LaShonda, raises her hand one day. I'm like, LaShonda, question. She's like, Miss Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShawn. I ain't all that. And
Bring
I
yourself
miss
down.
that. I
No.
miss the joy
Yeah.
with the little ones because they're so curious. And what
Yes.
breaks my heart is oddly by third grade, they're all quiet. And I'm like,
Mm.
wow, the system's already taught them
Yes.
not to be you.
Yes.
And it kills me. And I'm like, come on, kids, I want you being crazy. Like,
Yeah.
and we should celebrate. I always tell the kids, I'm like, it's so great. You're all different. If all of us were the same, the pandemic would have wiped us out, but we're all different.
Well, that's
And all
it.
of us have, you're really good at math and you're really good at reading and you're really good at making people feel good about themselves. And you're
Right.
really good about always showing up on time. Everybody has something that they're good at. And
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
my job to figure that out, amplify it, celebrate in front of everybody and get that kid, it really does. I was blessed, oddly. I lived, I mean, my wife is from Singapore. She grew up in the most negative environment, people telling her what she couldn't do her entire life. I have
Mm.
a photograph of me when I was 4 years old, and I'm wearing space boots, a San Diego Chargers jersey, a sheriff's badge, and a fireman's helmet because I was going to be the first ever astronaut, professional football player, firefighter, and police officer. I mean, that's the world I grew up in. And
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
every kid to be able to live in a world where they're like, you can do whatever you want. I mean, and you tell that enough to kids. I was speaking in India to an all-girls school. These two beautiful seniors come up to me afterwards. One wants to be a lawyer. Other one wants to be a doctor. I'm like, that's great. Are you going to go to university here in India, or maybe you'll go to the UK, or maybe United States? And like, oh no, we're girls. We can't leave India. I'm like, get back in that auditorium. Got them back in. I'm like, now is your moment, ladies. This was 5 years ago. I'm like, within 5 years, India is going to become the largest country on the planet in terms of population. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're a very young democracy, only about 70 years old. You've already elected a woman prime minister.
Yeah.
America still hasn't elected a woman president. Right now, there are twice as many women in India as there are people in the United States. There are actually more women in India with a graduate degree than there are people in the United States. I'm like, you just made it my mission in life. The next prime minister, the next CEO, the next really good mom is coming out of this class. I mean, I have things I tell kids all the time. I'm like, hey, sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and brightest. Let's go make this world a better place. I mean, you tell that to kids all the time. Get them pumped up. Man, I'm getting pumped up just talking to you, Audley. I love this with the kids, so I miss that.
No, it's amazing. I'm getting pumped as well. And I think if you can continue to encourage that, well, certainly the joy we talked about, but even that creativity and that energy and that spark and that belief that they can be and do just about anything. I think you're opening up a whole world. Really quickly, my mother has a photo. As you're talking about yourself in space boots there, my mother has a photo of me and another little boy, and we were in kindergarten. And I was wearing a hat, and I had a purse on my shoulder. I can't remember what. And the photo was a caption, and the boy's name was Lee. And Lee says, "Oh, Audley thinks he's a girl." And my response was, "No, I'm not. I'm a bunny rabbit." And, and so again, you can be what you want, you can do what you want, be creative as you can. Our young people are so good at that, and it's about how we maintain that and keep that spark in them. Because I think I truly believe that when you can maintain and stay in that zone of creativity and where you're happy and you're joyous, that's where all sorts of wonderful things can come out of it. So.
Oh, well said.
Yeah,
Completely agree.
very much so. Danny, this has been awesome. Talk about great things coming out of this. This conversation's been fantastic. I really appreciate this stuff, especially your message around joy, and clearly, if we can intertwine joy into all the things and weave it into our lives, I can't see how good that stuff don't come out of it. And you've clearly demonstrated that. For our audience, our listeners that want to learn more about you or catch up with your work, where could we send them?
Well, as a thank you to you and your audience for having to bear with me today, I wanted to give everybody a couple of goodies. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for an elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept, and you read that in 5 minutes. I'm also going to give everybody access to a 5-day reading challenge I did online last summer for about 700 parents around the world, where every day for a week, for an hour each day, I give you all kinds of strategies to get your kids more excited about reading, because the more excited we get kids about reading, the more likely they are to read. And the more you read, the better you get. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, you get all those goodies. And I just really appreciate you having me today, Audley. I appreciate all that you do. I love your smile. It's contagious. Don't change at all. Keep on spreading the good words.
Appreciate you, Danny. Thank you so much. And again, this has been a blast. And glad we did it. Glad we had it together. And again, for our audience, listeners, I'd encourage you to check out those gifts. It was very gracious of you, Danny, to offer that. And all the best, my friend.
All the best to you. Don't give up on being that bunny rabbit.
Not yet. Haven't yet. Thanks. As Danny reminded us, our habits shapes our destiny. By incorporating simple strategies like spending just 20 minutes a day reading, we can unlock a world of knowledge, inspiration, and growth. Embracing positivity and joy in our daily routines can transform our lives in a big way and empower us to live audaciously and authentically. For more insights and inspirations, connect directly with Danny via the contact details, which of course are in the show notes. below as always. Your feedback, questions, and stories are welcomed as well as appreciated. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please think about liking it, follow, or maybe even sharing it with a friend to help us reach more listeners and continue to spread this message of audacity, purpose, and joy. Remember, your audacious life awaits. Go out and live it to the absolute fullest. And until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.